Nothing on Me, a song by the singer Donovan from 1967, the same year as that pure black box modern building on your right. We can call it Misian, Mies van Gro's name, now an adjective for the style. A slight change as we enter the decade of the 1970s. Well, there's a port on a western bay. Hey, it's the 70s, and the white building introduces us to international style. Now, I would bet wherever you live on the planet Earth, you know an office building like that white building. Because the goal of the international style was, the future is moving way too fast. We don't know what businesses need, so we need to be neutral. We need to do the same box, no historic precedent, so we can put the same office building in any city, in any country around the globe. And in the 70s, cities began to all look the same. As a matter of fact, in the 70s, when the international style was so popular, you might wake up in a foreign hotel room and look out your window and say, I have no idea which country I'm visiting today, because every place looked like every other place. Let's go into the 80s now. I'll stop the world and melt with you. And we go to gateway number 4 with its mirrors. Does anyone remember the 80s? Shopping malls, big hair, and mirrors were everywhere. Well, those mirrors are contextualism. They're reflecting the architecture. To sum it up, black boxes 60s, white boxes 70s, mirrors 80s, and today's buildings, it's all about the glass. Everything you see today is very, very transparent. Hey, look at this little building with a red block on our left. I must be honest, we tour guides hardly ever talked about it. It didn't excite us. So I think the owner sat down one morning and said, let's get on the tour guide's map. How can we get on the tour guide's map? Aha, let us put ourselves on the map. So they spent $800,000 and had a map of the river that you're traveling on imprinted on their building. Look at that red block. You are here. That's the building. This is the south branch of the river. This is the building. This is the south branch of the river. Isn't that better than GPS? Shouldn't all major cities have map buildings in the future? You know, one of my favorite things in architecture is occurring on our right. This is the old Chicago Central Post Office. This is called adaptive reuse. Find an old building and give it new life. 2.7 million square feet. 1921, largest post office on earth, booyah. We needed the space because the mail order catalog business in America was invented in Chicago by that friend of the farmer, A. Montgomery Ward, 1872, followed by Sears and Roebuck. But elevators tended to slow down the mail. Waiting for elevators can feel like waiting for Godot. Who knows when they're going to show up? So the post office abandoned the building in 1995. Now, if you're from Chicago, you might remember this. Every 2 years in the Sun-Times or Tribune, there'd be an article. Oh, they're going to rebuild the old post office. And you know what? It all turned out to be a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing. Until 601 West Coast shows up. A New York City firm. I do my homework. 601 West Coast of New York developed the west side of Manhattan. I said, this is cool. They have a track record. They're going to make it happen. And when they came to town, boom. Immediately they get Walgreens Corporate to be their anchor tenant, followed by Uber Freight. And then Pepsi Cola leaves their 16-story building, says, we'd like you better, we're moving in. And to top it off, they put miniature paddleball tennis courts for their employees on the roof with a jogging path and a green roof of prairie grasses. And by planting grass on the roof, you reduce your carbon footprint in your waste. Zoom, now the tall buildings are gone because the business district, which we call the Loop, is a bit behind us, and you had borders in the old days. The river was north, the lake was east, south and west elevated train tracks. Do you know this old phrase, necessity is the mother of invention? This is the story of Chicago. You see, there was no work from home back then. You had to show up downtown where the action was. We couldn't sprawl out, so we built higher and higher. How about a tip of the hat to Mr. Otis of the Otis Elevator Company? Without the Otis Elevator, you couldn't, and they came up with the brakes, you couldn't have done the skyscraper. By the way, Otis Elevator does have a regional office up north in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's terribly sad. Otis Elevator Minneapolis is in a one-story building. They don't have an elevator. On our left now, won't you be my neighbor? Hey neighbor, you could live right here. There's 3,600 residential units, sure. They're all going in right here, and you could live in Chicago. You know why this is happening? Because of the Riverwalk, because of the theater district, because over 40 years I've been in Chicago, there's a concerted effort to make the city livable once again downtown. And people want to live in the city again. And it used to be, I'm going to get it together, get a little house in the suburbs. Now it's like, man, I'm getting back in Chicago. It's happening there. A very early pioneer in 1986 was a curve building, River City, modeled after a river snake. And I bet you can tell me the architect. Can you see that? Can only be Bertrand Goldberg. Same architect who did the corncob-shaped Marina City Towers. Goldberg was the modernist thinking outside the box, who wrote in his journal, I rebel against the straight line. I refuse to remake humanity in the image of a machine. He was fond of quoting the greatest free-thinking architect, the man from Barcelona, Antonio Gaudi, who would always say there are no right angles in nature. Okay, my friends, I think I better sit down. Sorry. Because it's story time. Yeah, it's story time. Gather around the campfire, buccos. And let old tour guide Kevin go a little deeper into how Chicago became Chicago because of that great Chicago fire. Do you realize how close we are? I could take you on a hike a half-mile west right now and show you sacred geography to Colvin Street and the Chicago Firefighters Academy, where by dawn's early light or twilight's last gleaming, firefighters get their training, yeah. And I want to tug on your coattails about something. I want you to leave this boat knowing the greatest irony of the city of Chicago. And the greatest irony of the city of Chicago would have to be, now where do you think they built the Firefighters Academy, boyo? Well, me boyos, don't you know, they put it right on top of Patrick and Catherine O'Leary's barn. Now, do you hear what I'm saying? Firefighters today get their training at the very spot where Daisy, Mrs. O'Leary's Irish cow, kicked over that kerosene lantern on the fateful night of October 8, 1871, causing the Great Chicago Fire. Or did she now? Now, sure, the antenna in the distance is the Fire Academy. And sure, that was Mrs. O'Leary's barn. And there really was a Mrs. O'Leary selling milk in the neighborhood. The truth is, it was a very smart cow. When it saw the flames, it said, I'm out of here. It hit the road. Probably hopped a freight. Never saw that cow again. The truth is, though, that Mrs. O'Leary and her cows had nothing to do with the fire. I say forgive the cow, free Daisy. We will never know what really caused the Great Chicago Fire. Quite frankly, in a city made out of wood with no building regulations, fires happened all the time. Now, the story about the cow, we know where it came from. It was a hoax. It was made up by a newspaper reporter named Michael Ahern, and he admitted that he made that story about the cow up in an interview during the World's Fair of 1893. But you know what? It was too late. The legend refused to die. And every year on October 8th, hordes of kids would march over to the O'Leary barn and throw rocks. Better late than never. October 6, 1997, City Council of Chicago says, that's it. We're going to put this silly story of Mrs. O'Leary's cow to bed once and for all. So you know what happens? City Council meets. They have the historians come forward. And the historians prove that Mrs. O'Leary and her cows were sleeping that Sunday night. And you should probably look instead at the O'Leary's neighbor. A shady guy. A man of questionable character by the name of, wait for it, Peg Leg Sullivan. Now, Peg Leg Sullivan is the man who reported the fire. And the theory asks us this question. What do you think Mr. Peg Leg Sullivan is doing, snooping around his neighbors, the O'Leary's barn, in the middle of the night? Looking for cerveza. He's trying to steal beer. They now believe he started a small fire to cover up his beer-stealing crime, which got way out of control. So Mrs. O'Leary and her cows were exonerated of all guilt. I must say, huzzah, huzzah, hooray for cows. Welcome to Chicago, where if need be, talk to me. I can get you a pardon for your bovine. That fire lives on in my pineal gland, opening my third eye. I have an epiphany. The Great Chicago Fire was such a turning point in this city's history. That fire gives we, present-day Chicagoans, our spirit, mettle, and will. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine you're looking on October 7th, 1871 at the Chicago skyline. 17,450 buildings are before your eyes. Now blink. Blink your eyes. And 36 hours later, 17,450 buildings disappear in a puff of smoke. That's the Great Chicago Fire. The builders did not wait, but on Tuesday morning walked into the ashes of the once great city, where they counted only 14 buildings out of thousands still standing. They got the I will spirit. Now, friends, Chicago is a living museum of history. I like to send people beyond the boat. I showed you the Magnificent Mile. Remember the shopping district by the Wrigley Building? Well, when you walk the Magnificent Mile, I timed it out for you. A 15-minute walk from the Wrigley Building north past the big fancy stores will bring you to Chicago and Michigan Avenue and your visitor center, the Water Tower. Now the Water Tower, you can't miss it. It's the only castle on the block. It's a little yellow castle. It was built in 1869. It was a standpipe for the water pumping station across the street. Now when the Great Chicago Fire came roaring down the street 2 years later, the Water Tower escaped without a scratch of flame, as if it was saying, "No thanks, I'm a Chicagoan, think I'll stick around." And it is said that morning after the fire, the builders gathered round, looked at the Water Tower so sweet against the skyline, and they all had the same thoughts. We will rebuild this city. And that, my friends, is why the unofficial motto for Chicago to this very day remains, I will. And the spirit of I will, my friends, gave us the tallest building on the planet Earth for 24 years. Still the tallest in Chicago in front of you now. It is the Sears, now Willis Tower. I must say this building in a way has two names. To we old school Chicagoans, that will always be Sears Tower. Sears Company built it back in '74. We didn't even care when they moved to the suburbs. It was our Sears Tower. Flash forward 2009. London-based insurance brokerage, the Willis Group, takes over 3 of 110 floors, and they are given naming rights. Without asking us, it's renamed the Willis Tower. This was hard for us old school Chicagoans to accept, but we have all come around. I understand that that building's official name is no longer Sears. It is now Willis Tower. I know that you spell that word W-I-L-L-I-S, but if you live in the heart of Chicago, you pronounce that word Sears. That's the proper way to say it. It's 1,451 feet. Architect Bruce Graham, and from Bangladesh, Pakistan area, Dr. Fazler Khan, first engineering partner for Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. And you know what they had in their head as an image? A bundle of sticks wrapped together for strength. That would be the best thing to withstand the Chicago wind. That becomes the construction. The bundled tube system, number 9. Contiguous steel tubes, each 75-foot square. 2 stop at 50 floors, 2 at 66, 3 at 90, the final to 110 stories. Reduce the mass because you're in the building because of the wind shear effect. You're in the Windy City. Oh, I gotta be honest though, the nickname for Chicago, Windy City, had nothing to do with the wind. It referred to our early politicians. They would never shut up. They were always bragging about how great Chicago was. They were like me, full of hot air. Why do I feel like I'm in an Alfred Hitchcock movie for a moment? Okay. But the truth is, it is a windy city with 81-mile-an-hour winds. You got to deal with that. When I look at the Sears Tower and I think about the wind, I remember the words of the great Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, writing in the Tao Te Ching, can one learn to be flexible? Can you follow the way of nature, the Tao? Can you yield and overcome? Can you bend and remain straight? And for me, I say yes. My Sears Tower follows the way of nature. It can bend and remain straight. You know, tall buildings have to be flexible. It's called their sway factor. Now, on a day like today, 6 inches, that's not much. The cool thing, they designed it for a once-in-a-lifetime 200-mile-an-hour wind. If need be, 18 inches left to right. Tallest building in the world for 24 years. Tallest building today, Burj Khalifa, Dubai, 2,717 feet by Chicago architect Adrian Smith. Say hello to Ceres, the Roman goddess of grain, where we get the word cereal from in English, perched atop the Art Deco Board of Trade 1930. At 605 feet, do you know, that was the tallest building in Chicago for 35 years, you know? And John Storrs, the sculptor, he never gave the statue a face. You go up there, it doesn't have a face. And everyone was like, yeah, who's gonna see it way up there? But in Art Deco, you don't really do faces. How many people watch the Academy Awards? Oscar is an Art Deco statue. Oh, I must name John Storrs every time I do a tour, because there was a day when I forgot to name that artist. And do you know what happened on the very day I did not say his name? A young man stepped off the boat and politely said to me, hey, Kevin, I wonder why you did not talk about my grandfather. I promised John Storrs III that his grandfather, John I, would be on every tour I ever did. You know, I told that story a couple weeks ago, and 2 young college-age guys get off the boat and they're smiling, and they said, hey, Kevin, thanks for talking about our grandfather. And I said, who was that? And they said, Dr. Fazler Khan, your engineer on the Sears Tower. That's how history comes alive in Chicago. 2 buildings to note on our right. The Pink Tower, 311 South Wacker, castellated Gothic, was the tallest concrete reinforced structure in the world when it first went up at 961 feet in 1990. Let us take a moment and look at the west face of the Sears Tower and gaze in awe upon that building. As you continue gazing upward, friends, imagine you are French. Your name is Alain Robert, but the whole world knows you better as French Spider-Man. Alain Robert is the French daredevil. He's climbed every tall building in the known universe. I don't know about the unknown universe. I haven't been there lately. August 1999, with hands and feet alone, in 2.5 hours, he climbs on the roof of our Sears Tower. He follows that with the Golden Gate Bridge of San Francisco, California. Home to Paris for the Eiffel Tower. Kuala Lumpur, Petronas Towers. Taipei 101, Taiwan. And then he goes for the top of the mountain, the Jelly Jar. They let him climb the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. Friends, consider the mind of building climber Alain Robert, the daredevil. Think about how this man wakes up every day and sees the universe. Because in its simplest definition, architecture is how you and I define and inhabit the space we live in. So you or I, when we look at the Sears Tower, we might say beauty or function. But when our friend Alain Robert looks up at the Sears Tower, he says, Kevin, all I see is another obstacle to help me overcome my greatest fear. The man is afraid of high places, heights. 40 years of climbing, he's always scared. I'm getting him a new therapist. But look up and wave, friends. Look up, look up, look up, look up. That's for you. That little glass box on the 103rd floor. Look it up on your phone. Willis Tower Sky Deck. I'm going to get serious now. If you visit the Sky Deck, did you notice it has a floor of glass you see all the way down? If you're going to visit the Sky Deck at the Willis Tower, I would have to compare it to the Schrodinger's cat experiment in quantum physics. There's only two possibilities. In one universe, you're going to look through that glass floor, 1,053 feet all the way down, and you might say, this is way cool. I'm walking on air, unless you're me in the universe next door. And when I go up there and I look through that glass floor, 1,053 feet all the way down, I tend to say, this is not cool. Where is the bathroom? I have no problem with boats. You won't find me up there. Let us go to the building with the serrated corner on our right. You know what serrated corners means on an office building? You can double the number of corner offices in office politics. Everybody wants the corner office for big face, prestige. Now what I'm showing you is my favorite engineering story. Who's an engineer? Engineering, says boom, bah, here we go. Okay, this is the former Chicago Mercantile Exchange Center. 2 40-story office towers originally flanked a 40,000 square foot column-free financial trading floor when traders communicated hand to eye. So the entire weight of the ceiling is by those horizontal struts supported on the load-bearing walls on either end. However, for extra office space, look at the cantilevering out of the top 34 stories. Now we have a problem, too much weight. If you do not address that issue, may we switch from the building to my own arms for time-lapse photography. Okay, my arms are the towers. If you don't do anything in 5 years, gravity, Mr. Gravity is going to show up and your building's going to look like this. That didn't happen because of mathematics. Alfred Benesch and Company structural engineering firm made a simple calculation. 1/8 of an inch difference was all it took. During the building phase, here's what they did. They pulled the floor plates out 1/8 of an inch progressively from ground to midpoint. Are you with me? First floor, second floor, third floor, fourth floor, fifth, you're only doing 1/8 of an inch. When you get to the middle of the building, you push them back in. We now have 2 towers with what I would call a camber and artificial bow, because it's going to disappear. This is why we study math. It makes life easier. They did the math and let gravity do the work, and as their calculations, they were spot on. As the building settled, it pushed that bow back into a straight line. That's mathematics. That's engineering. Let's return to the 150 North Riverside building, coming to a point. Now, I do like my theory that nicknames help us to understand the building, but I think you should choose the right one. As you look at this building, I heard 3 interesting nicknames for this 2017 building. First, someone saw the point and they immediately said, aha, the Guillotine Building. And I said, I can see that, but no, that's a rather terrible nickname. And someone else looked at it and said, the Tuning Fork. I said, that's a little better. But when a third person mimed holding fine glassware and said, what about the generous martini glass? I said, there's your nickname. It does look like a martini glass. And I like that nickname because the same way a person holding a martini might tend to sway, the building wants to sway. When they did the wind test, they knew they'd need a heavy counterweight. The heavy counterweight is agua, water. At the top of this building, they installed 12 water tanks holding 160,000 gallons of water on site. Now, the fancy name for that is inertial slosh mass dampers. Let's call it a shock absorber. The building starts to sway a little bit one way. Guess what? That's no match for the anchor, that inertia of the water. So the building's like my puppy dog on a leash, can only go so far. Got to come back. And then, of course, the water, being fluid, is going towards the opposite wall. That's pretty high-tech stuff. In fact, there's only one other building using water tanks for sway like that. Jeannie Gang's St. Regis Hotel. Oh, the Great Lakes building occupies historic corner right there. In 1860, you would have found the wigwam or rickety wood building built in 5 weeks for one event, the Republican National Convention, where 10,000 delegates and visitors crammed inside the building meant for 5,000. And on the third ballot, after a little backroom dealing, handshaking, you vote for my candidate and I will vote for yours, son. Mr. Abraham Lincoln received nomination to run for the presidency. And on our right, a lot of mojo on this bank of the river. Right here on this lawn, in 1833, you would have stumbled into a barracks with a pig wallow for a street. Chicago's only hotel, the Sauganash. Native American, Potawatomi for English-speaking Canadian. But the Sauganash wasn't run by that guy, Billy Caldwell. It's run by Billy's best friend, the French-Canadian Creole fiddle player, Marc Beaubien, known for running through his hotel with that fiddle, saying, I fiddle like a devil, yay! I keep my hotel like hell. But 13 electors sat down in the Sauganash Hotel. They voted to become a city. It was 12-4, 1 against. So Chicago's birthday, March 4th, 1837. And what stands on such hallowed historic ground today? The beautiful Nuveen building where movie fans, yes, that is where Ferris Bueller's dad worked. In the rather popular teen comedy that came out of Chicago in the 80s, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Bueller. Let's talk about Art Deco. Yes, let's return to the Merchandise Mart. So, I mentioned Joseph P. Kennedy. Does anyone remember Joe Kennedy? Father of our late president and senators. He was a man of action. He got things done. Joe had a way of getting you just what you needed. 1945, he walks into 96 acres, 4 million square feet of space. I'll give you a good analogy. You could fit 73 American football fields inside the walls of the Merchandise Mart. And that meant it was perfectly suited for the furniture design trade. So you have buyers' showrooms to the industry upstairs, retail stores below, and trade shows all the time. Joe added the Merchandise Mart Hall of Fame, the statues you see along the bank. Now they are not, as comedian David Letterman claimed, the Pez Candy Hall of Fame. No, they're merchant princes like Marshall Field and F.W. Woolworth. That noisy train going overhead is a Chicago L, short for elevated. I remember the first time I took an L train ride. It was 1892, and we had it for use by the World's Fair of 1893. I think that car may still be at the Chicago History Museum. When you go see it, you can decide if I was actually riding it in 1892. I'd like to talk about the River Walk. Carolyn Ross Barney is the woman architect who did the modern iteration, all the thematic areas of the Riverwalk since 2016 that you see here. And she was just given the highest award possible by the American Institute of Architects. Now the ideas go all the way back to Daniel Burnham and the plan of 1909. Do you see those obelisk lampposts and the balustrades there? Almost Parisian, right? Like along the River Seine. Daniel Burnham was a student of history, sitting along the banks of the River Seine or the Thames or the Rhine, you name it. You know what Burnham did? He took notes, and you notice this: great cities rise up along a river because that river offers you industry, wealth, and spirit. But over time, industry on the water would transfer to land, and the river would go from industrial to recreational. Burnham saw that that was Chicago's future. Is this amazing or what? Burnham saw what would happen in Chicago today over 100 years ago. He left the plan so we could make the Riverwalk a reality today. And that's what's going on. Hello, good citizens. Can we thank Daniel Burnham and the plan of 1909? Of course, that's why you're enjoying the Riverwalk today. Huzzah, huzzah, hooray for Daniel Burnham. They all love Daniel Burnham, as do I. Now, I like my architects with a dash of salt and a sense of humor. And that's why I love the Spanish architect, the Catalonian, Ricardo Bofill of this building, 77 West Wacker Drive. Ricardo Bofill is architect as DJ. He's not afraid to sample many different styles and turn a building into a mixtape. I mean, check this out. You've got a classic Greek temple-style roof, little porticos, the white lines, pilasters that give you the idea of columns married to the glass curtain wall of modernism. I look at that building, I imagine a lonely skyscraper married to the Parthenon. That's the offspring right there. 35 West Wacker Drive, checkerboard finish, home to Leo Burnett Advertising. Looks like a Greek column. This may have been the idea. Irish architect Kevin Roche is nodding to Chicago School. Louis Sullivan, father of Chicago School, said you should think of a skyscraper like a Greek column. Look at the building, I'll give you Sullivan's actual words. He said every building should have a solid base, you've got that, a soaring vertical shaft, a roof or capital area like a column, every inch a proud and soaring thing. Hey, any Frank Lloyd Wright fans, Prairie School? If you look at the top of that building with overhanging eaves, just the very top, take that down, give it a green lawn, it would look like a Frank Lloyd Wright Prairie School house. Would even have like a cool conversation pit inside. By the way, hello. This beautiful little park on our right, my friends, is our Illinois Vietnam War Veterans Memorial Fountain and Wall of Names. It is a favorite of Chicagoans. And now we look up, look at that dark green Art Deco building with a 24-karat gold cap. Looks like a bottle of champagne, no? Today, that is the Pendry Hotel, but the champagne design may have been intentional. It dates back to Prohibition, the Capone years, when legally you couldn't be popping a cork on a bottle of bubbly. It was designed by the Burnham brothers, Dan Jr. and Hugh, for Union Carbide, makers of the dry cell battery. Many people think that champagne design, no accident. Editorial comment on the era. Now that building, the Jewelers building, the skinny rocket ship building, 75 East Wacker Drive, and the Wrigley building, they all have something in common. They're all early 1900s, and they're all clad with terracotta. Terracotta was the most popular cladding material for skyscrapers after the Great Fire, and you probably know why. Terracotta translates as baked earth or fired clay, and in both instances, that means fireproof. And that was your most important thing. But you can also color and glaze terracotta like an artist. You ever watch an artist work a canvas? In my bohemian youth, I moved in with a painter. I learned a lot and a little bit about painting as well. Now, the great painters have something in common, shading technique. Look closely at the Wrigley building. Charles Biersman uses not one, not two, but 6 different very subtle shades, blue white to a creamier white, to make the building jump out. Ooh, and look at that, like a Gothic Cathedral Tribune Tower, former home to the Chicago Tribune newspaper. 1922, Colonel McCormick offers $100,000. Worldwide design contest for the most beautiful office building in the world. Howells and Hood of New York win, inspired by the Gothic cathedrals of France and Belgium in that design. The newspaper moved out, the building's gone condominium. You can live there for $700,000 to $7 million. Join me, let us pool our resources, acquire the penthouses. We will change our last name to the Addams family. We're all going to be living up there in Gothic splendor. Okay, friends, real quick, I'm going to give you fun things to do on the Mag Mile. Start at the Wrigley building. Go right downstairs and find the Billy Goat Tavern. Inspiration for the comedy's SNL sketch with John Belushi. Cheeseburger, cheeseburger, cheeseburger. No fries, chips, no Pepsi Coke. Stand in front of Tribune Tower, scavenger hunt. Find a piece of the Taj Mahal, the Great Wall of China, Westminster Abbey, and other artifacts. Keep walking until you come to the Water Tower, your visitor center which escaped the Great Chicago Fire. Those are some of the things you can do on Michigan Avenue. NBC Tower on the left might look to know, we acknowledge your existence as human beings. We see you. We see you. We do see you. Okay, friends, look right here. Your end game is coming up. The building with the antennas over there. You see that building with the antenna? Don't miss it. The first of our super talls, Big John, formerly the John Hancock Center. You want to see that building. It's Bruce Graham and Dr. Fazlur Khan before the Willis Tower. The Willis Tower is taller, has its own charms, but this is a work of art. I want to give you a cheap thrill. It won't cost you a penny. And after shopping the Mag Mile, you won't have any pennies left anyway. So for free, this is all you have to do. Look at Big John over there. You want to stand over there right below it, right? And you want to gaze upwards for 30 seconds and the euphoria will set in, and you will suddenly feel as if you are flying, even though your feet are still on the ground. This is the power of art and architecture to move us. If you're feeling adventurous, look up on your cell phone right now, Chicago 360. On the 95th floor, the observation deck is a glass box with 8 windows. You get in standing up, holding on to roll bars with 7 other guinea pigs. They start the hydraulic motor, and the little box is going to tilt you 30 degrees into thin air. It's not my cup of tea, it might be yours. Just a nod in the background, you're going to see a building that looks like a wave in motion. That was Jeannie Gang's first skyscraper, Aqua Tower, and reaching 859 feet. That's kind of cool. That was the first time Jeannie Gang got the title, the tallest building in the world, by a woman-led architectural firm. So in essence, when she finished this Regus in 2020, she had to take the title away from herself. Here you go, Jeannie. Why, thank you, Jeannie. Friends, this is an older part of the Riverwalk on our left. I loved it in the 1980s. It's like urban planners woke up and said, wait a minute. Maybe they made a deal and said, okay, cars, you get 90% of the city. 10%, give us a pedestrian walkway along the river. The real conversation piece is that beautiful fountain coming up on our left, Centennial Fountain made of Vermont granite. 1989, commemorating Dirk Lohan, by the way, Mies van Dro's grandson was the architect. Centennial Fountain commemorates the 100th anniversary of a very important group, the Chicago Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. That group achieved one of the 7 engineering wonders of the United States. They caused the natural current of the Chicago River to abnormally flow backwards out of the lake. Chicago, the name of the river coming from Native American Chautauqua, place of smelly onions. 1673, Father Marquette, a passionate priest, Louis Joliet, an excited explorer. They arrive here exploring for France. They look at the river and say, too much mud, we're going home. Until the river guide, a 10-year-old Native American boy, shows them a shortcut. That at the end of the south branch of this river, portage your canoe to the southern flowing Des Plaines River, flowing into the Illinois River, and that goes right into Big Muddy, the Mississippi, meaning Chicago becomes a critical link in a waterway system connecting the entire continental United States. The 1848 Illinois-Mission Canal makes us a boom town. We reach 1 million people by 1890, but 1 million people, and as our poet Carl Sandburg named us, we were hog butcher for the world back then, with our Union stockyards on the south side, immortalized in Upton Sinclair's novel The Jungle, about the meatpacking industry. All the meatpacking plants and people use the river as a sewer, which pollutes the lake, killing Chicagoans from typhoid and cholera, repeated epidemics. So 1900 sees the completion of a new canal, the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal. Now this time we got smart. We dug it so much deeper than the Chicago River, we took out more dirt than the famous Panama Canal. And using gravity as an aid, we cause the river to flow backwards. Yay! We save our drinking water, Lake Michigan, and we send all that pollution south to the city of St. Louis, Missouri below us instead. If anyone is from the wonderful city of St. Louis, Missouri, I am here to apologize. We're getting the river cleaner. Just east of Lakeshore Drive, the only skyscraper east of Lakeshore Drive is Lake Point Tower. Shipwright and Heinrich, former students of Mies van Dro. Tallest count of the world in 1968. First curvilinear skyscraper. Now this is DuSable Lakeshore Drive, and you are not supposed to have any private buildings over here. The lakefront is to remain forever open, free, and clear, yet somehow this building up here in 1968, as soon as it was finished, the city sewed up that loophole so it will not happen again. In front of us, the Chicago locks holding in fresh water since 1938, when every Great Lakes state and Canada, oh Canada, sued Chicago for reversing the river. Now we come back to Navy Pier, Arcade and Freight Pier in 1916, World War II naval training base. Today, one of the most visited destinations in Chicago, complete with Ferris wheel. So appropriate for the inventor George Washington Gale Ferris from downstate Galesburg, Illinois, put up the first Ferris wheel during our Columbian Exposition. Folks, we begin our docking procedures. You must take your seats and remain seated for docking for safety. My name is Kevin L. Burrows. I've tried to tell you everything I know about Chicago. I will be waiting for you all at the top of the ramp as you disembark to take questions and say goodbye. Talk to me up there. Now, friends, I own the tour. I in the tour in my own special way. For Chicago, an architectural gym is also home to its own musical style, the Chicago Blues. Give a nod to Sonny Boy Williamson, too. Rice Miller, Chess Records for the melody. I'm Chicago bound. I'm Chicago bound. They're trying to burn it down. Well, I'm Chicago bound. They're trying to burn it down. We'll build it right back up, and I'm Chicago bound. The river runs downhill. The river runs downhill. The people shout, I will. The river runs downhill. The river runs downhill. The people shout, I will. I'm Chicago bound. Let's go home. Welcome to Chicago. Once again, folks, if you would please keep your seats until we have the